2nd October 1608, in the Dutch city of Middelburg, a lens maker created a device that would make distant objects appear closer. Just 1 year later, this news reached Galileo Galilei. He improved that simple device, turned into a telescope, and pointed it toward the moon and Jupiter. And what he discovered changed the course of history forever. He provided some of the first real evidence that Earth was not fixed at the center, but was moving around the sun. This belief went against the accepted view of the Catholic Church at that time and led to one of the most famous and tragic trials in the history of science. Einstein later called him the father of modern science. But despite all this, Galileo spent the final year of his life under house arrest. So the question is, what exactly did Galileo see in the sky? Why were people afraid of his discovery? And most importantly, how did one telescope change his life forever?
So Galileo tried to invent the first clock.
And Galileo built a telescope and started seeing the moons of Jupiter.
Earth is not the center of the known universe, and your holy book that says it is may be wrong.
He says Galileo was not only one of the greatest scientists in history, this is Einstein telling Galileo, but he was one of the greatest writers and minds of all of human history.
The year is 1564, and Galileo Galilei has just been born in Pisa, Italy. His family was not very rich, and that's why his father wanted him to study medicine, because at that time, doctors earned more than mathematicians. When Galileo was just 8 years old, his family moved to Florence, and later, his father convinced him to attend the University of Pisa, where he would study medicine. But Galileo was not passionate about medicine. What he truly loved was mathematics and science. He left the university after just 4 years and started teaching mathematics in Florence. 3 years later, he returned to the University of Pisa not as a student but as a mathematics professor. And it was in Pisa that Galileo started questioning Aristotle's old idea about falling objects. Earlier, Aristotle believed that objects fall at a rate proportional to their masses. For example, if you drop one ball that weighs 1 kilogram and another that weighs 5 kilograms, the 5 kilogram ball should fall 5 times faster than the 1 kilogram ball. But Galileo thought this was wrong. To test this idea, he went to the Leaning Tower of Pisa and dropped 2 objects from the top, one heavy and one light, but both roughly the same size. He dropped them and watched as they fell to the ground, striking the floor at nearly the same time. But why does this happen? A heavier object is pulled by gravity with more force, but at the same time, a heavier object also has more inertia, which means it's harder to accelerate. These two effects perfectly cancel each other. That's why a heavy object and a light object fall at the same rate if we ignore air resistance. Centuries later, during Apollo 15, astronaut David Scott did the same experiment on the moon and showed that Galileo was right. With this experiment, Galileo had questioned one of Aristotle's oldest beliefs, but this was just the beginning. After 3 years in Pisa, Galileo moved to Padua near Venice, where he would work as a professor of mathematics for the next 18 years. And it was here in Padua that he would fundamentally change the understanding of the universe forever. At that time, many educated people entered authoritative belief in Ptolemy's view of the universe. Ptolemy was a Greek scientist living in Egypt in the 2nd century CE. In his view, Earth was fixed at the center, and the sun, moon, planet, and star move around it. This is known as geocentrism. Aristotle had already supported an Earth-centered universe, but at the time of Galileo, many astronomers believed in a different system proposed by the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe. In this system, the planets orbited the sun, while the sun and the star moved around Earth. About 2 decades before Galileo's birth, Nicolaus Copernicus published his book on the revolution of heavenly spheres, in which he argued that Earth and the other planets move around the sun. But because this idea was controversial, the book did not receive major support at that time. Most people simply believed that it would eventually be proven wrong. But Galileo wanted to understand exactly how the universe worked and which of these systems was true in reality. So what he did next changed everything. In 1608, glassmakers in the Netherlands had been making unbelievable progress in creating quality lenses. It was just a matter of time before a lens maker named Hans Liffersche from Middelburg created the first clearly recorded telescope. He submitted a patent for his creation on 2nd of October 1608. Over a few months, word of this invention is spread throughout Europe, eventually reaching Galileo in June 1609. When he heard about the invention, the early telescopes were capable of increasing human vision by just a factor of 3, but Galileo thought he could do better. He immediately traveled home to Padua from Venice and started creating his own telescope. It took him just a few days to have his first prototype. Galileo's improved telescope was capable of magnifying objects by 20 times. After perfecting his telescope, Galileo finally decided to do something that no human before him had ever done. Point the telescope toward the moon and see craters and mountains. This was against the accepted belief of the time that the moon was a perfect smooth surface, unlike Earth. After just 3 months, he pointed his telescope toward the Jupiter for the first time in history. Galileo saw 3 stars that were extremely close to Jupiter, and 6 days later, he noticed a 4th object around Jupiter. They were nothing but the moons of Jupiter. But people believed that his lenses were defective, and that what he was seeing was simply an illusion. But this discovery raised a serious question. If everything in the universe was supposed to move around Earth, then why were the moons moving around Jupiter? But Galileo did not stop here. He then pointed his telescope toward the Venus and saw that it was showing phases, similar to the phases we see on the moon every month. Using this observation, Galileo concluded that Venus must be orbiting the Sun, not Earth. And with that, the old Earth-centered model started falling apart, and the people offended the most were the Catholic Church. The most prominent figure in the Catholic Church at the time was Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. Whenever the church needed an important interpretation of scripture, it was Cardinal Bellarmine that the church would look to. Galileo was actively arguing for the heliocentric model of the solar system, which says that Earth and other planets orbit the Sun. But importantly, Galileo himself was a Catholic. He also said that scripture could not contradict what is true in nature. Cardinal Bellarmine warned Galileo before heliocentrism was restricted. Galileo was warned not to hold, teach, or defend the idea that the Sun is fixed at the center and that Earth moves around it. In the same year 1616, heliocentrism was considered contrary to church teaching. Because of this, Copernicus' book on heliocentrism on the revolution of the heavenly spheres was suspended until corrections were made. This correction essentially removed or changed the parts that presented Earth as truly orbiting the Sun. 7 years after Galileo received the warning from Cardinal Bellarmine, Galileo's friend became the new Pope. Galileo talked with this Pope about the heliocentrism problem, and they agreed that he could write about heliocentrism if he did it in a theoretical way. So, in 1624, Galileo got to work, writing probably the most important book he would ever write. 8 years later, Galileo published Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. In his book, Galileo wrote about 2 fictional characters. Salviati was the one who argued for the heliocentric system, where the Sun is at the center. Another was Simplicio, who followed Aristotle and Ptolemy, arguing that Earth is at the center of the universe. Salviati easily won the argument, suggesting that his views were correct and suggesting that this was what Galileo believed. The Pope read the book and became extremely angry. The Roman Inquisition banned the sale of his book and called Galileo to explain his idea to church authority in 1633. At that time, Galileo was nearly 70 years old and extremely unwell. Senior church leaders were handling Galileo's case, all of whom were personally appointed by the Pope. Their job was to protect Catholic beliefs. This case continued for weeks. Towards the end of the trial, Galileo was questioned very strictly and warned that he could be punished if he did not tell the truth. Finally, they found him vehemently suspect of heresy for his opinion that the Sun is at the center of the universe. and he was sentenced to live under house arrest for the rest of his life. Galileo's book was banned, and all of his published work as well as anything else that he might write were also prohibited. He did eventually decided to write again, writing a book called Discourses and Mathematical Demonstration relating to two new sciences. This book summarized much of his work over the last 40 years. Einstein highly praised his work, and it is the reason that many people consider Galileo to be the father of modern-day science. On January 8, 1642, he finally passed away in his home. In 1718, they finally lifted the ban on reprinting all of Galileo's work with the exception of Dialogue. It was until 1835, nearly 200 years after Galileo wrote Dialogue, that the ban was finally lifted. Galileo was punished, but the question he asked did not die with him. If Galileo had accepted what everyone believed, we would know very little about the universe today.